Welcome to the chilly winds of the Okanagan Valley in November. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce you to our guest today. His name is Robin Routledge, and he is a psychiatrist living upon the traditional territory of the Cowichan peoples in a community known as Duncan on what is called Vancouver Island. Robin has a most unique journey, which I am thrilled to have him share with us today. For his entire career, he has been searching for communal practices that help to bring healing and wellness to those who are suffering and living with distress. Robin has a special relationship with the person who is also my mentor, Lynn Hoffman. Robin was close to Lynn for decades. Lynn often talked to me about the work that Robin was involved in, and she often asked me to pass greetings on to him. Robin is a psychiatrist who is searching for communal ways to be helpful for people. That is not a small task, considering the traditional realms of psychiatry. Robin moves away from the internalizing and pathologizing approaches that are characteristic of the psychiatric world. This conversation with Robin is a journey. It takes us through a wide world. We touch down in places as diverse as Italy, Russia, Bulgaria, and at the end of it all, we settle upon the ways and wisdom of the first peoples of this land that we live upon. I must add that both Robin and I have been dealing with health issues. Even though they are both different issues, some of the symptoms tend to be the same. We are both particularly dealing with health issues that tend to bring a most undesired tiredness to the mind. So I ask of you, the listener, to understand that the ideas being talked about in this conversation are not just professional interests. They are deeply personal as well. With all that in mind, it is an honor to welcome to the Communal Practices Project, Robin Routledge. Robin, it is a joy meeting with you today to talk about the concept of communal practices.
Again.
But before we kind of move directly into that, the inspiration, as you know, for this came from Lynn Hoffman, who later in her years said she doesn't do therapy anymore. She doesn't do family therapy anymore. She does communal practices, and then kind of left it for us to figure out what she meant by that. So that's why I took this project on, because I thought Lynn wants us to develop this idea and to talk about it. But I've been interviewing a number of people, but one of the things I've always said about Lynn Hoffman is that she doesn't have followers, she has children. And I am one of them, and so are you. You are one of
That's
Lynn's
an honor.
children.
Thank you. Yeah.
And she
I'm
thought
glad.
of you that way.
Actually, yeah.
So I wanted to.
I know. I felt very close to her.
Yeah. Do you have anything you'd want to say about that as we begin?
My
About
closeness with Lynn.
Yeah.
It was an honor. It amazed me. It kind of shocked me. She called a break in her talk, and so people left the room to get drinks, and I sat there scribbling notes, and she just walked up like 13 or 15 rows. It was an elevated theater, and down 20 places of chairs, and sat down beside me and said, "So, how's it going?" And that was the beginning. I was her friend from then on. And I'm not totally sure when that was, but I think maybe 84 or so.
That would make sense. Yeah.
So then I've just had lots of contact with her, and she's a huge influence personally and in her writing. But also she's helped me sustain a theme in my life, which I could tell you what that is,
Please.
if you want, because I was thinking about this talk about communal practice. So, and there's this word therapeutic community, which is, it's maybe not a word that we would love right now, but it's a word that was invented in the late 40s,
Right.
when everything else magical happened. 1949 is just an incredible year. But my awareness of that people are the source of meaning and health to each other at all times. So I was thought about that, and I thought, well, how do I know that? So if I wrote down my story, so I could say it briefly to you, but it's still.
Oh, please say it briefly for this purpose. Yeah.
Well, it's a little, it's a little bit long, but I'll try and
say
say
it
it as
long
snappy
then.
as I can.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. All right. So it begins in 1966 when I got fired from my job, and I walked in the door of a big mental hospital and asked for a job, and they put me onto an inpatient unit where the average length of stay was 35 years. It's
Oh my.
all the adult lifetime of these men, all men. And I found out later that the average length of stay of the staff was 35 years too.
Oh wow.
So right in the first hour, I was just thunderstruck. What is going on here? And what I was watching was the interaction between the patients and between the staff and between the patients and the staff. So it just, it was like a harpoon. And so I have not been able to get that harpoon out ever since then. That was in a mental hospital, Alberta Hospital, Edmonton, Oliver. So I trained there as a psychiatric nurse, and then took that interest to Calgary, and was a student of Carl Tom's in the University of Calgary, getting my medical degree, which is very helpful to me. The Governor of Alberta and the University of Calgary sent me to World Health Organization for a year and a half in 1977. And so I was studying public health psychiatry was the ostensible topic. But what it was really about was, how can a government create a well nation? How can a municipality create a well neighborhood? And so it was all about that. And I did all kinds of things, like the Soviets had a journal of psychiatry for Africa. So these African psychiatrists would send these articles, and they were in kind of not very good English, and the Soviets gave them to me to make them better English, because I was there, and I had seminars with the Soviet psychiatrist all the time, and also the Bulgarian psychiatrist. Wow. And the Yugoslavian psychiatrist too. So and I was checked out by the KGB, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're okay." So
I had no idea about this.
Oh yeah. So I rewrote all these wild articles, and they're all about community in Africa, and they got published by those psychiatrists, or those doctors or people. And actually, the Soviets invited Lou, who my wife, and me to Barcelona for the World Biological Psychiatry Congress, and we went as members of the Soviet delegation, not the Canadian delegation. It was totally different to travel as a Soviet, I'll tell you. Anyway.
You think you know somebody, and then
yeah. But another and more interesting thing, and something I shouldn't have gone into that because it's irrelevant. I beg your pardon.
No, that's not irrelevant. That's fantastic. And it was about community. It was about.
Oh yeah, no, I saw it that way.
Completely relevant.
Yeah, so they were trying to help me learn what is public health. Like, public means of the people,
Yeah.
So I heard about this prison in England, and because of my references and recommendations, they accepted me as a student at Grendon Underwood, where they'd never had a student before. Also, World Health Organization had never had a student before. I don't think they've had one since either. But so I got to go to this prison for, I can't remember, weeks and weeks, either 2 or 3 months, I think. Anyway, and Lou went there for a week too. So it was a high security prison for extremely violent people who still had a long time to serve in jail. But it was that the prisoners ran their wing of the jail. And they had small groups that met 3 times a week. And then the whole wing of 50 men met 3 times a week on alternate days. And I met with them every day. They discussed each of them and each of the groups, and they were helping each other. So it was, how do you create a context or a conversation of helping? So it was amazing. It introduced me to this whole literature. It's a huge literature of therapeutic community. The therapeutic communities began in England after the war, trying to reset. No, they didn't. They got strong in England after the war, resettling, returning prisoners of war and servicemen. But they actually began before that for homeless people in Manchester, I think.
Really?
Yeah. So I just latched onto that, and it was huge. So I carried that as my North Star, my Polaris guiding star. And then when I met the Milan team, and that's another one, they picked me out. They just reached in and plucked me and said, "You're with us." I look back and I think I've had angels come and just take me up and fly me away. And there's another couple, and so the Milan systemic approach was like, for me, therapeutic community. They were creating a community of ideas and talk where the therapist was just a participant, and all the participants had the same value and worth, and everything and everybody was doubted. And I loved it. It was just.
Now, before we move on, just for the sake of this film, maybe we should give a quick description about who the Milan systemic people were and their significance. So, because so we can kind of put that in context.
Milan systemic approach. So there's a famous Italian Milanese psychiatrist, Salvini Palazzoli, and she invited Luigi Boscolo to come and work with her to learn how to meet families. He had finished his psychiatric training in New York, Bellevue Hospital. Came back to Milan. He's from Laguna, Venezia. So they started off, and she wanted to bring in this other psychiatrist, Prada. And the way I understand the story, and there are many versions of this though, so different people will say it differently, and how you say it will sort of determine where you are politically with the Milan school.
Yeah.
That Luigi really wanted to do it with Gianfranco Cecchine. Cecchine joined at the same time, and they began meeting to discuss ideas of how relationships and families can relieve or intensify suffering. And so they read a huge amount. They studied how words can do it and how indirection can do it. So they had all these brilliant ideas, and they never stopped evolving and changing. That's an important part of the story. They separated into 2 groups in 1980, probably 1980, where Bosco and Cecchine became a team. Salvini and Prada became a team. They just exploded on the world stage in late 79 and changed everything.
Yeah.
That changed the whole idea of suffering from belonging to an individual, and their practices changed how to talk to people. They revolutionized absolutely everything. It's hard to believe how much they changed everything.
And from them came the collaborative movements. From them came the narrative approaches. Many well, I think there was some influence
They
there.
wouldn't admit it. Lots of them will not admit it.
No, and I think that that's all right. But I believe those influences were there.
Yeah.
And so many of the quotes therapeutic approaches that I value came from that realm. In the response.
They attracted many brilliant people, all the smart people in the world who were aware of the field at all. Saw
Irish
this.
Smith Province.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go on and on.
And amongst them, especially Lynn Hoffman.
Lynn Hoffman, yeah.
Yeah. So she
Arguably one of them.
Oh, yeah. They many times talk to me about the very positive response they've had to Lynn Hoffman.
Yeah.
Of course, they're all gone now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's okay. Their ideas are thriving.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
lots of their ideas.
I think it's
their ideas are going now, and people don't even know they're doing it. Don't even know that they're doing things that were influenced by Milan or Lynn Hoffman and all the others that joined in. In fact, it stopped being the Milan systemic approach, and it just became an orientation that's in many, many, many approaches and stories. It's everywhere. Yeah. Sorry, I kept on talking while you were talking.
Well, no apology necessary. We're just trying to navigate the delay that happens on Zoom.
So anyway, I was hit by the Milan approach, and they continued to innovate and rock the world, all over the world, until the mid 2000s when Gianfranco died, and then later Luigi got sick and with a horrible sickness, and then, but the school is still changing and just wonderful place.
Yeah, anyway, so Barbetto's running it now.
Barbetto is the director at the moment. Yeah. So I in the midst of that moved to the Cowichan Valley in Vancouver Island, and so I had a chance to do things differently here because I just decided to. It was big changes, and lots of people felt that I did not act respectfully of lots of people on the ground, and I am really ashamed of that because I could have. I didn't think of it or how important it was to value what was here as much as I should have. I was judgmental, but I did strike up a couple of things that were based on the communal idea. One of them was called Mood Clinic.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, all the people who had like major depressions or bipolar mood disorder or horrific anxiety, which turned out to be a lot of people who had been through extreme adversity. In fact, it turns out over the years that almost all of them had been through very extreme adversity. So we met every Tuesday from 1983 in December until I couldn't sustain it in 2014. And then they continued meeting without me and just themselves for another 5 years. So, and the whole process was talk amongst themselves, bouncing ideas and offering each other support, lots of one-on-ones, lots of group discussion for an hour. And then they had a chance to talk to me. And
I met them.
each other. Yeah, you came over.
No, they came over to a thing I was doing with Lynn in Burnaby.
That's exactly right. I remember 5 members of Mood Clinic came and met at Granville Island.
Maybe it was Granville Island. Maybe it was there. Yeah, and Lynn just loved it.
Yeah. That I'd forgotten. They actually came, and if you remember, I was just one of them, right? Like I wasn't their leader.
No, exactly. And it was the same time that I brought some of what Lynn later called the fairy godfathers. Do you remember that?
No. Tell me.
We had these caregivers we were working with that were all ex-bikers in recovery.
Yeah, no, I do remember now. Yeah.
Yeah. And they came out, and Lynn called them kind of impulsively, I think of you as the fairy godfathers, and there was this moment of silence, And then this uproarious laughter. That just
Yeah,
loved
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. And ever since that time, she wrote about it. And ever since that time, that's become one of her famous sayings.
Yeah.
You know, the fairy godfathers.
So then the other thing was a thing called medication clinic. So for all the people who had psychotic disorders, and they received antipsychotic medications, and quite often injections, usually injections. And they would meet once a week on Thursdays with me, and this with also with the Cowichan Mental Health Center staff who supported them. And they talked amongst themselves, and the idea was to get it so that they took care of each other every day on the streets in the community, and knew each other and knew everything, and were each other's guardians. So I had lots of talks with them, and I just learned a ton from them. And so it was all about that mutual support, relieving suffering, and enhancing wellness. So I actually met Lynn when those two things were functioning.
Yeah.
And she just kind of anointed it or baptized it. The Milan guys came too and met them, those clinics, and they were impressed. It wasn't at all families. And so there was no identified patient because we were all the same, you know. But they just said, you just keep doing this, and Lynn said, these people are teaching you, Robin. I remember her telling me that. That's good. And it was me learning, and all of them as the healers. It was a healing place, and sustaining wellness, learning wellness. So anyway, so then, you know, I met those guys, Lynn, in many places around the world. After that, it was like coming and having a drink of whatever you're drinking, which looks really good. Wow. So I would say the next step in my particular journey was what I should mention, studying conversation at University of Victoria, and the topic there was how does talk work?
Was that with Jan Devilis?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
it was mostly with the group of students, and some great students came through that. Although I was a professor, I was just a student, and we wanted to think of Jan as just a student with us, and I think quite often she was able to achieve that. But studying how does talk work is not really about communal practice. It's a study about how does talk work. So that was a different thread altogether.
But it's connected.
It's parallel. Yeah. But what is connected was one day I got a phone call which invited me more or less out of the blue to Watson Lake in the Yukon. And it was because I had seen a Watson Lake First Nations woman in the emergency room at Cowichan. And so they invited Alan Wade and me to go there, and he's still going there. And they've taught him a world. I went there for 8 years. I went there 4 times a year for a week each. And what they were teaching me was how First Nations create wellness through the land, through relationship, through continuity.
Yeah.
And the interaction between that and I guess I can use the word colonial practices of the medical establishment there. Like I'm aware now that the medical profession and our whole presence for First Nations people, and I'm thinking for a lot of people, has been damaging, and sometimes purposefully damaging, sometimes like really on purpose withheld public health principles from First Nations people having a epidemic on Vancouver Island, so that something like 85 maybe % of them died in 1 year on Vancouver Island.
Really?
And the same epidemic hit white people, and nowhere near that percentage, because they were well taken care of by nursing in the hospital and so on. And they were told to separate and not contact each other, whereas the First Nations people had none of that, and that was a purposeful decision. They were given Indian hospitals.
Yeah.
And anyway, I am ashamed of it. But the shame of it is not my motivation. My motivation is how they sustained themselves through that, and what the values were and the practices were that can create a well community. So they have been teaching me a lot for a long time, but it really got intense for me at Watson Lake. After 2 years, I realized they did not see me as a visiting psychiatrist. They saw me as a visiting student. So it was neat. So I from all of that, I wanted to do things differently in Cowichan. So I think, in the first group of people that were made the Collaborative Services Committee in Cowichan, which was started by the Health Authority of Vancouver Island and the Division of Family Practice, the primary care doctors here, to say, how can we work together to enhance wellness? And I wanted to be a part of that and represent specialty, and members of the community had to be invited. So the whole thing about that the whole community has to participate in this became really evident to me then. And part of it was, I remembered, oh yeah, that's what I learned in World Health Organization. The members of the community have to be a part of this. And then I realized that a conference had happened while I was in Geneva, produced the Palo Alto, not the Palo Alto, it's in Kyrgyzstan. It's a city where a conference was made that just said everybody in the world deserves good primary care and health wellness. So this model called the pentagram model, which is that all of the community has to be present to produce wellness, became apparent to me there. And that's what I've been chasing for the last 12 or 13 years on a couple of committees who hold that value, the Joint Standing Committee and RCC BC. And then I have found places in the world who deliver well communities, like where they actually address themselves to not produce healthcare primarily, but wellness, and that healthcare is a small part of that. So they're outstanding communities, 3 of them in particular, South Central Foundation in Alaska, and that one in Utah. I sent you a paper of them. And also the Jönköping County in Sweden. What they all have in common is participation by the whole community, guidance by the values of the community. I think he's saying there are many people in our society who are disconnected. And if we disconnect, if we other, if we estrange anybody, then we are creating a situation of not wellness for everybody. So that's also what Lynn said, with the whole idea of we're all connected under the earth.
Yeah.
And we're all connected. So if we say no, that part is bad, then we're all bad. So for example, once upon a time I was consulted as a psychiatrist in the hospital about this person on the renal dialysis unit, just to strike a chord for you. So I went up there and they said he's very disruptive so we have to put him over there. He ruins the experience for lots of patients. The other patients are asking, can they please come on days when he's not there for intravenous, treatment, dialysis. And I spoke with him, and I knew him. And actually, the reason he was there was partly because of me, because I had been giving him lithium for 20 or 30 years, and lithium killed his kidneys. So I asked him, what's cooking? And he said, well, these people, they don't welcome me. They don't like me. And I'm not taking it. I don't have to like them if they don't like me. And so they're getting what they give. Whatever they say about me, I'm saying about them. So I said, well, what do you mean? Show me. He says, well, look. So he said, look around. So we're on the dialysis unit, and I looked around, and over the nursing unit was a cross. And it's a place high risk, danger, and people end their lives there and stuff. So there has to be a sacred, a spiritual component to it from the point of view of the nurses.
Right.
So they brought it, and it was Christian. But this guy's a Sikh. So they don't acknowledge me. So they think I'm weird. I'm not weird. Well, he was kind of weird, but he wasn't. He was creative. Actually, I liked him a lot, and you can tell that he was talking to me. He liked me too. We had a relationship. So I went to the nurses and met with them and said, basically what he told me. Did they have any ideas about including him more? And pointed out to them, you are welcoming lots of people, but in your way of welcoming a certain kind of person, you are inadvertently not welcoming a certain kind of person. Have you ever been in that kind of a situation? Of course, they all had, because they were, for one thing, women. Yeah. And so, so they started to get ideas about, they took the cross down. And then they asked him, what kind of things are Sikh? So he went, what? That's amazing. And so he and I had a conversation. I said, how could you bring these people along to appreciate not only what Sikhism is, but what differences are? And what kind of signs can you watch for in them of change and growth? And how can you encourage that for them? And at the same sneaky time and separately, I asked them, could you please watch for changes in him? So I'm getting all kinds of hints from all sorts of teachers all over the world about how to talk to them. You know what I mean? Like not that they would talk to me, but in my head they're all talking to me, because I have all these people in bleachers behind my eyes. All of them are watching me, and sometimes going, oh no. Then sometimes going, well, that's very good. Where'd you get that? So this is a good one. But it is also, if we're talking about communal practice, he positioned himself as their teacher. They positioned themselves like that with him, and they all were busy helping each other, and they created a well dialysis unit. And they sure left me feeling good.
What a great story.
Thank you.
So many layers in that story.
Yeah. I had completely forgotten about that story, but Dan McGee reminded me of it. Anyway, so that's basically how I got to where I am right now.
Maybe we can take some time talking about your current interest and your current work in developing approaches to medicine that work for rural areas in particular, those kind of conversations that you have. And in particular, if you could talk about the Alaska model.
NUCA.
System of care. Yeah.
It's a word. It's not an acronym. It's a word in their language, in their Alaska Native language.
Yeah.
And it means strong. It's a little bit like our Coast Salish word skookum.
Oh yes.
So we could say it's the Skookum Health Service.
Got it.
But they say Nuka. You know, a problem, sort of a problem for me is that, you know how they say fish don't know about water?
Yeah.
So I'm embedded in this. I probably don't know much of what I do or what I think. Another problem is that I had a pretty severe motor vehicle accident a year ago.
Yeah.
And had a concussion, and I have not been able to return to work since then, although I have been attending the committees by the grace of their generosity, and also recently been able to make sense of them again. But I'm struggling now to return to work as a psychiatrist, but it's a difficult process, and I'm not completely accepted in it. So so that's an important part of where I am. So you could notice me losing words or sometimes inserting the wrong word or something like that. And so my neurocognitive test assessment that I had a month ago would say that that's a frontal lobe dysfunction that I have, or that is enduring with me a little bit. So I have been able to position myself as a person reliant on others for my wellness. I have been very much taken care of here in my home by my wife, much more than ever before. And so for me to profoundly feel taken care of and extremely grateful for it and not diminished by it, and to see that it has actually enhanced and strengthened all of my relationships, to find myself in a vulnerable and diminished role, but still that my friends, colleagues, and reach out to me and encourage me and acknowledge the things they see in me, like you are doing right now, that seem to them worthy. The fact that you're doing this with me, and you actually know this about me right now, that I have a brain injury, that's so I can't.
Well, I also know that, as you mentioned, I don't know if it was part of the recording, but in our conversation here, we have parallel issues in that we both of our brains tire out. So if we're reaching that point, let me know.
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm just prefacing any comment I make by saying that I might leave something really important out.
But can I reflect on what you just said?
Please do, yeah.
There's something really, and I hope I can articulate it, quite profound. Because you spent your career bringing people together in order to support people that are suffering.
Yeah, that's true.
And now people are coming around you to support you in suffering.
They do.
There's something profoundly right about that.
Yeah, some great people.
And, you know, maybe that's such an important thing to emphasize. So you've been able to see this from two sides.
From all sides now.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
You musician.
Yeah. Well, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. One of the great songwriters of all time.
Joey.
One of the great songs of all time. I can see clouds right now.
It's true. And clouds are a good metaphor. It's in the cloud. So, well, I'm really interested in how can we in British Columbia encourage communities to become more healthy. And so part of that, me trying to answer that question is, where do they achieve that the best? So my friends have guided me to the communities who've done the best job of it, probably, or the best known job of it. I bet you there's a whole bunch we don't know about.
Yeah.
So I've been to Anchorage, Alaska 3 times to study their healthcare system, the South Central Foundation. So 30 years ago, the federal American government said, we want to give you the health money that we spend on your people, our people, and
Yeah.
you do it. So they thought about that for 10 years and discussed it, elders, and created an organization. A secretary in that organization rose rapidly through their organization and has been their executive director for decades now. An Alaska Native from a small village leads them. And they are guided by the wisdom and values of their elders and by information, or they create information out of data. They are constantly asking for direction from the people they serve. Every visit that anybody comes to them for assistance is followed by a questionnaire. How did this visit go? How could we do better?
When I read their website, the NUCA System of Care website, they constantly use the word relationship. Like a whole medical system built upon relationships.
When their mantra, their main thing is, it's all about relationship.
Yeah.
I sent you a little paper where I tried to summarize the evolution of wellness or well communities from the creation of the insane asylums in the early 1800s through all of that development, evolution of the psychiatric profession and the mental hospital. It's a historical account, how things have changed historically, but it also shows this thing from the Institute of Health Improvement, a guy by the name of Don Berwick. This is very connected to healthy communities like NUCA approach or young coping, because they've all followed this path. And I think they did it first, and then this concept came to Don Berwick of that there have been eras in healthcare, and the first one was the privileged medical profession. He tells the story about his father, who's a general practitioner and was very important in his own mind and everybody's mind. But then in around the year 2000, they suddenly discovered, and there were 3 papers published that showed that the majority of people who died in hospitals died from their treatment, not their illness. Scary thought.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
For us, more scary.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it changed everything to era 2, which was the era of quality improvement and quality assurance, and everything had to be examined and tested. And now he wants us to engage in era 3, and he's holding up examples of where that occurs. And he can talk about hundreds of communities that are doing this. He ferrets them out. Communities that are basing their approach on humility and the acknowledgement that everybody connected is a contributor. Children in a school that he went to in England, and the children had a huge proportion of obesity. So they began a walking program at which the children adopted, because it got them out of the classroom and having a lot of fun with each other and walking every day and encouraging each other. And they had a massive improvement in their well-being, not just their weight, their whole interaction, including in their families and everything. They told lots of stories about changes in their homes. So it's this way of everybody being a contributor. And I learned a ton about this from First Nations people. Anyway, the whole diagnostic empire of era 1 is a bit shaky now because we hear so much. Another thing we've heard from Donald Trump is about fake news. I never heard about fake news before Donald.
Yeah.
I didn't believe in fake news for a few years until all of a sudden it was like, oh, we're actually surrounded by fake news. Like, for example, the pharmaceutical companies have been delivering fake news in psychiatry ever since we stumbled on psychotropic medications by complete chance. It had nothing to do with them, but they've made trillions of dollars out of it. I guess my conclusion about that, because it pulls together most of the things I have been babbling about here to you, is that we're getting back to the values of a village.
Getting back to the values of the village.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've just been completing Arden Hanley's conversation with me, and we're calling it village making.
Yeah, good.
That bring up the same language.
I mean, I think it might be more efficient for me to read from my own little paper, but I would absolutely love you to read this and let me know what you think of this one.
Oh, I will.
But is it okay if I read something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Reading back the values of village to help us, we can seek the wisdom of people who never left their original values far behind, like industrial society has left our values far behind. Indigenous people can help industrial society recover. My view is of a Canadian who retains the culture of their original family, but holds overall values with everyone. So that we can learn from the Mi'kmaq First Nations group, who have published about two-eyed seeing, to be able to see something with two eyes. And we can see a forest of different kinds of trees. Hello, Lynn. Different kinds of trees who are all connected under the ground and sustaining each other and helping each other. Hello, Lynn. Oh, Lynn Hoffman. So humbly, sort of humbly, I want to be humble. But when you get an idea like that and the teachers that you have, I am not very humble about my teachers.
Don't worry about that right now. I'm more interested in the idea.
I propose all Canadians could learn from these concepts. We know things through our own original ways and perspectives, and simultaneously through the aggregate of our Canadian cultural ways. Canadians upholding and welcoming Indigenous culture, Indigenous people proud to be Canadians, and all cultures. Like, for example, my Sikh guy that I told you about.
Yeah.
Him upholding First Nations values. And so for me personally, I just say that the experiences of my settler grandparents in 1905 Alberta, those are really important to me, those values, who I am, who I used to think defined me. Blended though with the learning of our diverse cultural wealth. So my grandparents don't define me. My parents don't define me. The Robin of 10 years ago doesn't define me. It's what's happening and the people around me who are teaching me and guiding me and bending me, and against my will sometimes. And I'm responding to my surprise, like in What's It Like as a student. So that I just think is the core of wellness.
What a beautiful journey you've taken us on.
Thank you. Yeah.
I am so grateful, if that's all right. But I'm thinking we probably should wrap up soon. But before we wrap up, I would like you to stand up so we can see your t-shirt. Never mind the Bullocks. Here's the Sex Pistols.
I am an anarchista.
Robin Routledge, you are dear to me, and your wisdom and your journey is so important, and I am extremely grateful that you were able to take your time and to share with us today. I am so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for including me, Chris. You creator.